This session is about stress and leadership, broadly defined, and in particular, a psychoneuroimmunology approach, which you'll all be tested on at the end of the session, whether you can say psychoneuroimmunology. I'm just kidding. Those of us in the field call it PNI. And it is basically the interaction of the mind, the brain, and the immune system. And it's one of the most exciting areas in science today, I believe, and one that I will argue has great implications for public policy. So let's begin first with a hearty welcome. And you might be wondering, who am I? I am wondering, who are you? I love learning more about all of the people who are here at IDEASpHERE. And what are we going to do in our session this morning? So who am I? My name is Jen Lerner, and please feel free to call me Jen. I am a rather unusual bird here at the Kennedy School. I am the first and only person with a PhD in psychology to receive tenure. And yeah, in in the whole history of the school. Because, as you know, economics, political science, these have been the dominant disciplines that have informed public policy. But something happened, and people started realizing, you know what? These models of judgment and decision-making that we get from economics and political science, well, they don't quite capture actual human behavior perfectly. Maybe we should look at how the brain works and put together economics tells us how people should make judgments and decisions with a rational actor perspective. Psychology tells us how people actually do make judgments and decisions. And the exciting thing that's happening right now in the field is that these perspectives are coming together. So I work at the intersection of psychology, economics, and neuroscience. And my main area of study is judgment and decision making. In particular, I'm very interested in how emotion affects judgment and decision making. And I have a couple decades of work on stress. And it's one of my favorite interests, not because I'm ever stressed. That is what we're going to talk about today, is stress. So that's who I am. I should tell you, I am on sabbatical this year. I am a fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. And when Iris Bonet, the academic dean, invited me, she said, well, you know, I know you're on sabbatical, and it's really forbidden for deans to request you to do things when you're on sabbatical, because we get one like one every 10 years. This is the first one in my whole career. And she said, so I know, you know, you're not going to do it, but I just thought I'd invite you. And I said, absolutely, I'll do it, because I love talking with audiences like you, people who are giving up a day of work, of their normal activity, to talk about ideas. Now that is really fun. Also, because I study judgment and decision making, I want to learn from those of you who are out there in the world making judgments and decisions. So I am delighted to be here today, and thank you all for coming. I'm also the co-founder of the Harvard Decision Science Laboratory, which you may hear about. We're the only public policy school in the world to have a decision science laboratory where we're able to collect all kinds of data that help us understand human behavior, including some of the biological or PNI data that I'll present to you today. So that's a bit about me. And now a bit about you. How many of you are here at the Kennedy School for the first time? Raise your hands. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. How many of you are Kennedy School alumni, either degree programs or exec ed? Welcome, terrific. And how many of you are here from other countries? Wow, awesome, terrific. Let's see, have I left out any interesting groups? How many of you are academics? I think there's one of you. Many. Okay, terrific. Any other groups that want to identify themselves? Media, yes, we have a reporter here. And that reminds me. Politician, terrific. And yeah? Politician also? Terrific. Okay, I need to tell you, especially because we have politicians in the room. Oh, another group? The Women's Leadership Board. Yes, I got to have dinner with several of you. Hi, Janet. And last night. It's wonderful to have you here. And so I have to tell you that the Kennedy School has decided to videotape this session. And so that's happening now, if any of you need to leave the room. And I also should tell you that we have a wonderful audio-visual assistant here. And for the purpose of the video, the Kennedy School would love it if you would ask questions, make comments into the microphone. But you know, if you don't want to get up for whatever reason, that's okay. And also, we'll do our best to try to get mics to you. All right. I also want to introduce Ms. Catherine Kearns, who is my administrative assistant. And you are seeing a lot going on this weekend, but I have to say the unsung heroes are the administrative assistants who keep the faculty heading in the right direction no matter where we're going. And I tell Catherine, I'm leaving tomorrow to speak at the United Nations, and I don't have 10 things that are vital, and Catherine gets it done. And so they do a tremendous amount. And as you know, the Kennedy School is not a wealthy school. Our graduates are off in public service in one way or another, most typically. And so the assistants here have an overload. Okay, I think now what are we going to do? Well, I'm going to present to you some science that really excites me on stress and leadership. And apologies, it's going to be a little bit geekish. So we're going to look at graphs. We're going to look at biological data. My hope is that you come away with more questions than you had before. And we will, at the end, talk about ways to apply this research immediately in terms of making changes. So first, I'll give an introduction to stress and leadership. I'm going to show you 3 studies. The first one is a study that compares real leaders with non-leaders. And we measure their stress levels. A second study, also looking at predicting stress levels, is a sample of leaders only. And there we're trying to figure out what contributes to stress. The third study looks not only at stress, but also how that interacts with testosterone, a hormone you may have heard of. And that one we have male leaders only. And because we don't have enough of a female sample to study testosterone, you have to study them separately. And we look at how stress interacts with testosterone. Then we'll do some conclusions, implications, and ways you can apply the results. I also will give you a handout. The New York Times asked me to write an op-ed about this work, and I have that here for you. I also have another handout, so I'm saying that so I don't forget to give them to you. Okay, tips for our session. First of all, make yourselves comfortable in the classroom. If you prefer to stand, feel free to do so. If you want to move down front, please do. If you want to move in the back and escape out the door, now's your time. And I welcome questions throughout the session, and especially if they are clarifying questions. If I am saying something that isn't making sense, I really want to know. And not only am I a professor here, this is my day job, but it's also my night job. I live on campus, and I'm a faculty director of a graduate student building. We have this tradition at Harvard of having house masters for the undergraduates. We now have senior faculty in the graduate student building. So what I'm saying to you is that I live and breathe Harvard day and night. I don't get out much. And so if I'm not making sense, I need you to tell me. Okay. Also, if you have comments, I really want to hear them. I think we all want to hear your comments. But let's do that more toward the end so that we can get through the material. I'm determined to show you the data. And when you do ask a question or make a comment, please say your name. And if you want to say, like, you know, something quick about who you are, like, I'm from Brazil, please do. Okay, or just say your name, whatever you like. I think one of the great things about IDEASpHERE is not only the ideas, but the people you can meet while you're here. Okay. So let's take the question, should we care about stress as a matter of public policy? Well, I'm arguing that we should care about this if stress causes death and sickness. And as you may know, well, it does. It absolutely does. You all know the phrase, stress can kill you. And very often we have these truisms in life before we've worked out all the science. But in fact, the science has been worked out. The pathophysiology of how stress gets under the skin is known in several areas. For example, depression, anxiety, and heart disease. Now, these are some of the leading causes of sickness and death in this country. Heart disease is a huge killer. And if you look at base rates for what we're all at risk of in terms of dying, heart disease, every one of us, men and women. So right now, the pathophysiology is being worked out for links to cancer and other major diseases. So it can kill you. And one of the main ways it does this is that it weakens our immune system. Bless you. And so we're less able to fight off lots of different things that are attacking our bodies, like malignant cells. And cortisol is the main stress hormone that is secreted when we are under stress. And cortisol has a direct effect of reducing your immune system. Some of you may have, for one reason or another, had to be on a drug called prednisone or cortisone. And you probably know your immune system was suppressed during that time. So that's simply a synthetic version of cortisol, this stress hormone. So every time you are stressed, your immune system is weakened. Now, it's okay to get stressed if your body revs up and you have a challenge to meet, you get stressed, you have this adrenaline surge, and we absolutely want that. We don't want stress-free lives. If you are in a stressed situation day after day after day, it's that chronic stress that can be a problem. Here's just some of the compelling evidence. Let me tell you what's going on here. So here on this vertical or y-axis, we're looking at the correlation or relationship between a sample of over a 24-hour period. They collect cortisol samples, and then they look 6 years out what your chance of death is. So here, this is if you are 1 standard deviation above the mean in cortisol. And then you can see here the legend. So that's 48. And then as you have more and more cortisol in your blood, your 6-year chance of death more than doubles. It skyrockets. Look at that. And so stress can kill you quickly. It is no joke what we're talking about here. Okay, so the should we care question. Another reason why we might care is, first, we know stress causes morbidity and mortality. But what if stress is also systematically a function of occupational and social status? Well, if that's the case, then that becomes a public policy problem. And so we might say, well, okay, stress causes illness, causes death, but maybe we should leave that to the Harvard Medical School or Harvard School of Public Health. But they are going to work out a lot of the biology, but it's only in a place like this where we can work out how it connects to social rank, occupational status, and more generally, social status in society. Okay, so what is the relationship between stress and rank? Now, before I go there, any questions? Am I making sense? All right, you're with me? Good. So, when most people think about the relationship between stress and rank, we think about executive stress and the demands, and we think about these busy people in Manhattan, and not those relaxed people so much in Silicon Valley, but the busy people in Manhattan. And we have this image. Here's a quote that was actually in the Harvard Business Review. Managing others creates unending stress. Today's managers face increasing time pressures with little respite. Now, part of why we may think of executive stress is that way back in the 1950s, there was a famous study on executive stress. And they looked at gastrointestinal lesions, so ulcers in your stomach, and in a series of 15 monkeys restrained in chairs. And they had these executive monkeys, and it was an incredibly bad study. But this phrase, executive stress, really stuck. So they had no random assignment to conditions. So we are all familiar with randomized controlled trials. We always want that to be done on any prescription we're going to take. They had no random assignment. The executive monkeys were actually chosen to be in the executive position because they had greater emotional reactivity. So, problematic study. Okay. But it stuck, and the media, no offense, tells us that executive stress is a problem. There's a lot of focus on it. There's not a lot of focus on stress of mid-level people. You don't see stress of mid-level people books and that sort of thing. And, but you see a lot of this kind of thing. And so my colleagues and I were wondering, trying to figure out what is the relationship, if there is one, between stress and rank. And although there was this old literature about executive stress, we wondered, we thought to ourselves, well, yes, executive stress is a problem, particularly in this country where we don't have things like summer vacation to the extent that some other countries do. And demands on responsibility may increase, but here, as you see, we thought there are good reasons to suspect that being a leader could be associated with lower stress. Now, this is a very hard thing to study, because how are you going to get executives and say to them, we would like to collect your saliva or your blood so we can measure your cortisol levels? And executives come and say, we're a little busy, and I'm not going to give you my saliva. But I'll tell you, we found a way around this. But first, we went to the broader scientific literature. It's one of my favorite pictures of a scientist. This man here, Robert Sapolsky, is professor of biological sciences, professor of neurology and neurological sciences, and professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University. I don't know if you'd want to have him be your surgeon, but he is in the world of science, world famous genius. And one of the things he's been doing for decades is going to Africa and studying non-human primates. And non-human primates are wonderful for studying the effects of social rank, because rank is so well demarcated. It's very clear who the top baboon is. Some of you may have office settings where it's clear who the top baboon is too, but it's definitely clear in the wild. And it's also clear who the wannabe top baboon is, and who the ain't never gonna be top baboon is. And so he collects cortisol samples through mostly blood samples of these baboons, and he studies their lives. And what does he find? The higher you are, the lower your stress, as indicated by cortisol. So we have a lot in common with baboons. And we don't share all characteristics, obviously, but it made us think that this is worth looking at in humans. So, what drives this rank effect in non-human primates, and would we see it in human executives? So, whoops. We also found in the literature that being a leader boosts one's sense of control. And we have a household where I can never get the TV control from my daughter or my husband. And it's a complete power struggle. We have 3 people in the family who like to be in charge. That's all of us. Only the dog defers. And it turns out that having a sense of control buffers against stress. And this is true in lots and lots of studies. I'll give you an example. This is a complicated table from a meta-analysis that reviewed hundreds of studies. And it shows that there's a big difference between an uncontrollable stress and a potentially controllable stress. And these are afternoon, evening samples of cortisol. And here I've blown it up. And you can see the values. For the uncontrollable stress, it's really quite a bit higher than the potentially controllable stress. And that's also true if you look at daily output of cortisol. So who has more potentially controllable stress, leaders or non-leaders? It's the leaders. Things come up and leaders have options for how to deal with them. Okay, so in our agenda, we're now going to talk about the first study. So, any questions? Everybody good? Okay. So we hypothesized that leaders will have lower cortisol and less self-reported anxiety than will non-leaders. And it occurred to me that we could do this study here at the Kennedy School because my old office used to look out at the circular drive there where all of the motorcades arrived. And a tremendous number of people in positions of power come to the Kennedy School from around the world. And in particular, a tremendous number come to executive education. And I teach a lot of executive education. It's actually my favorite kind of teaching. And I would show lots of results in class of studies I'd done on undergraduate samples and that sort of thing. And my executive education students started saying, you know, Jen, we'd like to see our own results. We'd like to go to the lab. And they actually volunteered to do this. And so we've brought even royalty to the lab who come with bodyguards. And we attach electrodes while the bodyguards are standing by and that sort of thing. People who come to the Kennedy School, like you, are just curious people. And so we now have large samples of executive leaders. And there's many ways you can define what it means to be a leader. We used a very simple definition of just, are you responsible for managing others? So it's basically, do you have some control? And then we had a broader sample from the greater Boston area of non-leaders. So we're just trying to figure out here, is stress higher or lower in leaders and versus non-leaders? So we collect saliva at about 3:30 in the afternoon. By the way, just you know, every one of us has a diurnal sample for cortisol. When you wake up in the morning, it's the highest. Also, heart attacks are more likely to occur then, and the pathophysiology of that is being worked out. And then slowly throughout the day, your cortisol starts to drop. And so you really don't see many differences between people until after about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that is the natural diurnal rhythm. So here we have the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical axis, and which just explains the neural connections for how cortisol increases. And we also used a self-report measure of stress of anxiety. And people answered questions like the frequency to which they feel nervous and restless. All right, the results. So here is the leader group versus the non-leader group. This is cortisol on the vertical axis. And these are standardized scores. What you see here is that the non-leaders are significantly higher in cortisol than the leaders. Just to give you a sense for the magnitude of this difference, the average non-leader's cortisol level, 27.3% higher than the average leaders in terms of raw values. So major biological differences. And this difference remains significant, even when you control for age, gender, income, education, and mood. Okay, so now, anxiety, self-reported, shows the same pattern as biology. And that's, really important. I don't want to ever reify biology. Sometimes we think if we can image the brain that we're getting at truth. But, we need multiple methods. And people are pretty good at self-reporting their feelings. Yes?
Excuse me, I was wondering, you said that in the morning, it's when the stress level is higher.
The cortisol level, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My question is it better, or have you any idea if it's better to do exercise in the morning or in the afternoon, if that is a factor that it will help you to reduce the...
Okay, so let me correct what I said. The cortisol level is higher in the morning. The stress level is not necessarily higher in the morning. It's just that's the body's natural cycle. Yeah. And in terms of exercise, I don't know the literature well on that, but I think generally it's believed that exercising earlier in the day is better for you. Yeah. So let's see here. Now, it may be that there's a bidirectional relationship with stress. We can't say for sure in a study like this that leaders, being a leader actually causes less stress. It might be that being a leader leads to a greater sense of control and therefore does diminish stress. But it also could be that low cortisol people who are just wired up to be less anxious, may be especially likely to succeed as leaders. And so these answers are not yet known. Yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. I understand that you control for age and income and education, and can make that leap that the leaders, because of the more control at work. What about all the other factors in life?
Sure. We again, I think this study raises more questions than it answers. We don't know what about the work factors. In the next study I'm going to show you, we get a little bit of insight into that. Yeah? And tell us what was your name?
Oh, terrific. I actually do a lot of training around stress in corporate life.
Ah, terrific. And I didn't get your name? Ah, great. Welcome. And yes, sir.
Thank you, Bjarte. We have Norway. Did you look at mid-level managers versus executive-level managers in the study? Did you find any difference between the stress mid-level managers having pressure from below and above, and also just executive level?
You are both asking questions that are perfect for leading into the next study. Yes. So all we've established so far is that although executives may be stressed, or leaders may be stressed. Non-leaders are more stressed, even though they might have equal education and that sort of thing, okay? Just being in a leadership position here is associated with less stress. So that's what we can conclude, and now we want to know why. What's the psychological explanation, and how exactly does rank matter? So we go to study 2. Now, in this study, we want to look and see whether differences in sense of control mediates or explains the relationship between leadership and stress. So here we have a new sample of only leaders. And again, all of this was run here at the Kennedy School in the Harvard Decision Science Laboratory with people from executive education from around the world. Okay, we're getting there. So there is evidence that if people are randomly assigned to the role of manager, they have a greater sense of control, not only about the task in front of them, but over future outcomes unrelated to it. There's some sort of sense of being in charge that carries over. And we were very interested in that. Interestingly, there are parallels in rats, which we sometimes study to understand some of the biological pathways when we can't study this in humans. So there have been a lot of studies that take rats, they put them randomly assigned to one of 2 cages. Now, in both, by the way, we don't do this, and we would never do this at the Kennedy School, but there are scientists who do this. They put them in these cages, and they stress them by giving little foot shocks. I just realized I forgot to tell you, it might be distracting, why am I wearing a boot? My foot is broken, so that's what this is. So they give little foot shocks, and cage A and cage B, the rats both get these little foot shocks. However, in cage B, right before they're about to get the foot shock, a little bell goes off, which alerts them. They come to learn that this means a shock is going to occur. And in the other cage, no alert. And the shocks occur at equal frequency with equal intensity. But if you have a little bell that tells you, aha, it's going to happen, that means when you actually look at the stomachs of these rats, there are significantly fewer ulcers in the cage where they had the little bell. So you can have the same amount of horror in your life, but if it is somehow predictable, and you somehow have a sense that you understand it and you can know what's going on, it is not so bad. And this is, I'm just showing you one study there, but there are lots of variations on this. And it's even better if you can press a button that makes the shock go away. Then, wow. Then it's like it doesn't even matter that you had a shock if you can make it go away. Okay, so 2 hypotheses for this study. First, that within leaders, the higher they are in terms of rank in their occupation, the lower their cortisol and the lower their anxiety. And moreover, that difference we think is going to be mediated or explained by their sense of control. So how did we look at this? So we we drew both from the exec ed program and from the greater Boston area to get a leader sample. And we measured leadership level by looking at the total number of subordinates, and which also includes indirect reports, and the number of people the leader is personally responsible for managing, and the self-reported authority, such as he, she can promote or demote subordinates. So here's where we tie directly into what's going on in terms of occupational status. And as you can expect, we have people who come into the executive education program. I regularly have multi-star generals in the classroom, and they have a lot of reports, a lot of subordinates. Okay, any questions on how we're doing this? Here's how we measured sense of control. So in my relationships with others, I can get people to listen to what I say. My wishes do not carry much weight. We reverse score that one. I can get people to do what I want. Even if I voice them, my views have little sway, reverse score. I think I have a great deal of power, etc. It's actually known as the personal sense of power scale. Ooh, sorry about that. So it's a self-report measure. And here are the results. Let me just walk you through it. So these are statistical models, and all this is saying is that your leadership level, which we measured, in terms of number of subordinates, directly affects cortisol. The higher your leadership level, the lower your cortisol. And that's why this is a negative number. It's an inverse relationship. That's a beta weight. Now, here we look at, does this direct relationship, is it explained by sense of control? So first we see, yes, leadership level strongly positively predicts sense of control. And the more control you have, the less cortisol you have. And when you actually include this statistical path, then this one diminishes in power. So in other words, this relationship is very much explained by sense of control. Okay. Now, it's important to unpack what's going on here. This is actually not a diagram that I made. Robert Sapolsky made it, because when we published our results in a scientific journal called The Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the editors invited Sapolsky to write a comment on it. And in commenting on it, he drew this diagram, and I thought it was pretty useful. So here you see increased number of subordinates leads to enhanced personal sense of control, and that leads to lower cortisol levels and lower self-reported anxiety. Increased authority and autonomy also leads to this. But what doesn't lead to this, so remember these, we had a 3-part measure of leadership level, this one, and this one. The third part, increased number of subordinates directly supervised, does not lead to enhanced personal sense of control. So if you have a lot of people that you're supervising, you got a lot of stuff on your hands. Everybody's problems. And so having lots of subordinates is good, but not if you have to directly supervise all of them. And certainly having increased authority and autonomy is good. All right. Oh my goodness. We are now.
I have a quick question about
just
that.
Looking at the clock.
Sorry,
Yes.
I have a quick question. I was wondering if that was done only in corporate environments where people were getting paid, or if that was also true in volunteer structures. Because the question is, if somebody is in a lower position in a corporate structure, could they in their personal life engage in a volunteer structure that then can give them that self of control, or have that effect of reducing cortisol?
Very interesting question. And what is your name?
Sorry, Rachel.
Rachel. So Rachel's, I don't know if everyone heard, so Rachel's asking about, is this true in volunteer structures, organizations, as well as in regular employed? And we don't have the answer to that yet. We only have employed people. Yeah. Okay. So study 3. Now, what we wanted to do is, once we have learned how this interesting relationship between rank and stress, we were interested in how that would impact leadership attainment. In other words, how high do you rise within your respective organization? So it's well known that the hormone testosterone is associated with dominance behavior and power-seeking behavior. And you definitely see this in the baboons. It's a little bit harder to study in humans. So in this study, we could only look at males because the testosterone physiology is totally different for males than females. And we unfortunately do not have enough female leaders in the world and at the Kennedy School in Executive Education. So for this study, we looked only at males, and we hypothesized, let me see if I have a slide on this, that the more testosterone these men had, the higher their rank would be in their respective organizations. However, we call this the dual hormone hypothesis. We also thought that stress can really mess things up. And so being high in testosterone is only good, we reasoned, if you're not also high in stress. And so that's what we were looking at, and our dependent variable in this case, in this sample, was the number of subordinates. And we looked at how many people do you yourself manage, how many people are subordinate to you within your line of management, direct and indirect reports. Okay, so here are the results. So this is our dependent variable here, the number of subordinates. In other words, you can call this leadership attainment. It's a very crude measure. Of course, there's many other ways to be a leader other than having lots of subordinates, but it's what we were able to do because all of this is, you know, sort of first studies that have ever been done. And so here are the men with low testosterone and the men with high. We simply divided them in half at the median. And here, the dashed line are men with high cortisol and solid line, men with low cortisol. So first of all, if you look at men with low cortisol, so they are not terribly stressed or terribly anxious, what you see here is that the more testosterone they have, the more subordinates they have. And this is sort of what you would expect from all the literature in the non-human primate world. The link between hormones and behaviors is sometimes even a little frightening. It's so strong because you think you know why so-and-so is promoted, but you don't usually think, well, maybe there's high testosterone. And then look at what happens for the high cortisol men. The relationship here between low and high testosterone is totally non-significant. So essentially, if you are high testosterone, but you're also high cortisol, you do not rise as high in the organization. All right, And this research, this study here, is under review right now and has not yet been published. I think that when it is published, there will probably be some media coverage. And you can say you saw it first at IDEASpHERE. Okay, so study 3, conclusions. Biological factors appear to promote the pursuit and attainment of high status leadership roles. And testosterone most likely is predicting these status-related social behaviors. But cortisol blocks testosterone's otherwise status rising effect. And so there is some prior research on this showing sort of mixed effects of testosterone, and we think that the explanation is the cortisol. So here we are. Hooray, we're doing well on time. Results recap across the studies. So we know that the leaders are less stressed than the non-leaders, and the higher ranking leaders, if you just look at the higher ranking leaders, they're less stressed than the lower ranking leaders. The high ranking leaders enjoy an elevated sense of control, and that turns out to be an important psychological resource that buffers against stress. And we know that this dual hormone hypothesis explains quite a bit. Stress and testosterone interact in shaping leadership attainment. So what are the implications here? Well, one thing to keep in mind, as you maybe are hearing about in other talks, is that certainly, at least in the United States, we are an increasingly stratified society. And the differences are really increasing over time. And so it is even more important, as we are becoming so stratified, to understand stress in the workplace and how to design interventions that increase workplace health. So, shameless here. Our slogan at the Kennedy School, ask what you can do. I have 2 suggestions and 1 request. First suggestion is you can design interventions. Here is a simple scale, and this is called the Decision Authority Scale, and 9 questions that you have people respond to from often to never. And here, do you have a choice in deciding how you do your job? Do you have a choice in deciding what you do at work? There are studies going on in the UK of civil servants, and they're called the Whitehall studies, and they are finding lots of disability and death associations with the extent to which people feel a sense of decision authority. So you might think, well, what are we going to do? You know, the people in leadership positions will always have decision authority, and the people who are sweeping the floor will not. However, I ask you, what about the cleaning lady whose job it is to clean the lobby of an office building? Can she have some decision authority about what is the best time of day to do that cleaning so that she doesn't have all of the traffic? And can people, even at the lowest levels within your organizations, have a bit more decision authority? Because again, just like the rats are getting the same intensity and the same frequency of foot shock, if they have a sense that it's predictable, it helps. And so cleaning the floor of a lobby of a busy office building is hard work. And it's always going to be hard work. However, if that cleaning lady has some decision authority, she can maybe decide when to take a break, that sort of thing, which is an item on this scale. I submit to you that there may be health benefits down the line, that she may be less susceptible to illness and not have the kind of early death that I showed you. Remember that 6-year follow-up for cortisol levels predicting death? Yes, we have a, okay, yes, and your name?
My name is Sulaiman. I'm from Denmark. Anyway, I knew that came. It's an insider, sorry. We have difficulties by getting more Danish women to take management positions, even in a country like Denmark. Only 6% of the women are active in boardrooms, so it's a big problem, actually. And most of the women that I talk to say, you know, I don't want to be a manager because I don't want to be in a top position. I want a work-life balance, right? And I don't want to have this responsibility, so I don't want to go further up the ladder. So I think there's a huge need for executives to actually explain that they feel more control in their life and they are not that stressed. But in our country as well, it's very powerful to say, you know, I'm so busy. And it keeps actually the women away from the positions because they believe the men when they say they're busy, which they are not, of course.
That is a fabulous comment. And it hadn't occurred to me before that the more we get the word out that there's actually less stress at the top, the more we can bring women into those positions of leadership. And it's absolutely true. As a tenured professor at the Kennedy School, I have enormous responsibility, but I have enormous control over how I'm going to accomplish those responsibilities. And thus I am able to do a lot of things. Was there? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Savannah. I was kind of piggybacking off of what Terry mentioned earlier, but I'm a sociologist, so my perspective is a little bit different when discussing this because I see the need to be able to differentiate stress and what it actually means. So we're obviously talking about more occupational type issues, but with the ranking and understanding what, for instance, the cleaning lady is up against outside of work and how that affects her ability to actually do the job of what she's doing. So based off of what the young woman just said as well, you know, bringing into it, I completely agree. You have more autonomy to do things. You have more control would really affect your work environment, but all outside of that as well, the influencing factors, you know, if you cannot focus because you're worried about rent or family issues or all these other things, you're not going to be productive. So how do corporations or entities at all, just from a policy standpoint, address that? You know, whether it's daycare centers for kids or education, health insurance, whatever that may be. I'm very curious as to what you think on they can do to help this sort of work-life balance.
Another important comment. So absolutely, we have to look at the, and as a public policy matter, we have to look at the person as a whole. And if she can't get daycare, that's going to be in her mind all day rather than, oh, I get to decide what break I take. And so we have to, oh, thanks. So we have just another 12 minutes and still several things to cover. So we have to look at the person as a whole and all the stresses in life because this is critical for human well-being. And there is so much we can do. And it doesn't necessarily need to be spending more money. But we can do this with smart policies. So this is an accomplishable goal that is very important. I'm going to go through a bit more, and then take all the comments and questions. Okay, what's the second thing that you can do? And I am inviting you to come back for more. I am the faculty director of a Kennedy School executive education program, relatively new. I guess it's been around for a few years. Sells out every time and carries a wait list. So I feel a little bit funny about promoting it. However, the school is going to expand it. And we talk a lot in that class. It's a big focus on not how to improve your judgment and decision making per se, but how to create an organizational environment that makes everyone smarter. And so in that, we also talk about not only designing better decision environments, but also how to design healthier environments. And I have brochures here for that program, and I'm going to give them to Catherine, and when we, let's see, do you want to start handing them out? Okay. Another thing, and here I'm completely shameless, is help us pursue this research. So give meaningfully to the Kennedy School. Looking at psychological factors in human well-being really has never occurred at the Kennedy School in the history. So all of this is completely new and is an area where if you do decide to give even a tiny bit, goes a very long way. This is one of the only places in the world where this research is being done and where it could be done. I mean, where are you going to get executive samples coming through all the time? And where are you going to get international samples so that the data that we collect is valid not just for Americans, but for people as a whole? Where are you going to have a decision science laboratory where you can actually collect? We have, military generals drooling into a straw so we can collect their saliva. You have to be in an interdisciplinary environment like that. And most importantly, you have to be in a place that cares about the public impact of this research. So I myself am fascinated by how the mind works, but I am equally fascinated with how we can immediately use the results to make the world a better place. And so here at the Kennedy School, we don't just do science for science sake, although that's a valid enterprise. We do science that is going to help people. And so please inform me about, and my colleagues, about your research ideas. So we had several ideas already generated in our discussion. And also, I'll get you in a sec, if you are in an organization where you would like us to come study how interventions might improve things, I really want to know, because we would love to come and try out some of these things. And maybe you have friends and colleagues who are in organizations that might like to try out some of these things. So advise us on where we can present this work, where we can further study this work. I have another handout for you so that, and would you mind distributing those? Oh, okay. So if you want to read some of the research that's already published, you can see it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or I have a summary of it in that New York Times op-ed. And I hope that you will continue to be engaged with these ideas, because they will only have impact to the extent that people like you carry them. As I said, I don't get out much. So now I would like to, and here's my email so that we can stay in touch. And now we have about 6 or 7 minutes for open discussion, comments, questions. And you have had your hand up for a while. Tell us your name.
Yes, my name is Rosanna. I'm originally from Venezuela, and I am a young global leader for the World Economic Forum as well. 2 comments. The first one has to do with, I noticed that the studies are very based on linking leadership with decision-making, with authority. And one of the things I would say is, these are more like my own insights, and making decisions is very stressful for many people. So when we talk about, just go down the chain and let other people make decisions and let them decide, sometimes we might be creating actually more stress for them in their lives, and we think that we're helping out. That's one thing. And the second thing that it's a reflection on how our world is changing so rapidly, and what it means for us to have now a generation of millennials that are actually going to challenge a lot of these things that are all of this research and the way that things have worked. Even when you discuss the baboons and the ranks, who are we going to turn to for evolutionary experience when ranking is something that these generations are really not recognizing anymore? So how this new millennial integration into the workplace, and I employ over 40 millennials, so it's a big issue for us. How do we apply what we always knew as leadership principles and what worked, and how those things are really not working anymore? And so I'm looking forward to how the research is going to evolve in that direction.
Thank you. Does anyone want to comment or respond to those points? Okay, or a new point. Yes. Mr. Gooch.
How are you there, Jen? I'm Harry Letterman, and I've had the privilege of taking Jen's course on critical decision making, and I must say that it has helped me immensely reformulate how I think about forming a question and asking it, and the results that I get from those questions. The course is phenomenal, and you're part of a very exclusive group that is phenomenal. Anyway, that's the advertisement. I would like to know how we could get that slide that showed the 9 various questions, because I found that I did not have time to write that down, and it was really fascinating, because I'd like to be able to ask or think about asking those questions, because I think that's a great way of forming a better group of individuals to support whatever the object is.
Yes, great. So I suggest that whoever you work with, give them that scale. And I am making my slides available, even though some of that has not yet been published. And so I guess through the Kennedy School, Catherine, maybe you can be the point of contact for getting copies of the slides. Can I ask you to write your email address on the board here? And because I absolutely am happy to share those. Okay, Sandy.
I'm Sandy Gooch, member of the Harvard Women's Leadership Board. I would like to beseech all of you, if you have not visited Jennifer Lerner's Decision Science Laboratory, you really need to. It is state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind, thrilling, awesome event to visit and see. Please do. And then, after you do, you will know why it is so important for you to donate and contribute money so that this laboratory can continue its superb work.
I paid them to say that. You've had your hand up for a while, yes. And tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Pam King-Petrot, and I am the Senior Director of Data and IT for Uncommon Schools, which is a charter management organization. My question is, how does this impact, you know, obviously these leaders are already adults, but leadership is as a practice. This is what we learn here at the Kennedy School, right? How can you start, what are the implications for education and changes in K through 12 education for the key types of things that you need to maybe teach for decision making so that you could prepare children to become leaders?
Okay, music to my ears. So I personally think that rather than teaching things like calculus, we should be teaching practical skills like decision making and statistical analysis, because people need to understand risk by understanding probability, and yet we have absolutely no training in statistics, typically in primary education. And you can't really make a good decision if you don't understand probability. And so in my fantasy world, we developed a new curriculum, just like the leadership decision-making program, but for kids, because we know so much more about the brain now and the kinds of heuristics and biases that mess us up. And so understanding those helps you design environments that make people less susceptible to those. And right now, kids' understanding of what's risky is what they see in the media of what's available, and that's a natural. But we need them to be able to understand, real base rates for risk in order for them to make informed decisions. So again, in your organizations, if your organizations have schools, we'd love to come in and do studies on what if we try to teach this kinds of better decision making. And also, what if we teach how you can have a really hard life, but if you find ways to enhance a sense of control in your hard life, you will be healthier, and all those kinds of things. Absolutely. Yes, and tell us your name.
It's clearly hugely important to aim your, as it were, your education towards leaders who have the power to change a lot of the behavioral scheduling, timetabling stuff. But if you're among the many who are not in leadership positions, so you're the people, who are actually at the receiving end of all this loss of control over your life, then surely you should also be even more focused on the strategies that people can use themselves when they have no control, and because of the nature of their work, or I'm thinking of, say, junior doctors, or people in many kind of industries. And also, if you could comment on the other piece of research which I read recently, which came out of Harvard, which is that that stress only harms your health if you believe it's going to harm your health, but that if you believe or frame your stress response as your body getting ready for a challenge, and you're now ready because you're feeling all hyped up, that in fact that mediating thing actually breaks up the relationship, to some extent at least, between stress and ill health.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the most exciting facts is that there is not a direct relationship from stress to illness or disease. Instead, we have this step in between, which is cognition. Whoops. And so this path here, and I showed it to you in a statistical model, you see this relationship, but we can interrupt that relationship with, how do you appraise the stress? Do you appraise it as an overwhelming challenge or a manageable challenge? And there are cognitive techniques that can be taught to help people appraise it as manageable. So I see that now we have actually exceeded our time. And I could go on all day. You can't believe how painful it was for me to cut out studies because I wanted to show them to you. But thank you all for your fascinating comments and questions.